Welcome to Authenticity FM, where we share real stories and bold ideas to build better communities. I'm Phil Corrali, joined as always by my friends and co-hosts, the good doctor, Corey Spiegel, and the ever-contemplative thinker, Mike Sable. Together, we bring you candid conversations that make city and county management feel more human and a bit more fun. If you haven't already, follow us on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, and thanks for being a part of this growing community. Today, we're sitting down with two city management legends, John Phillips and Steve Carter, each wrapping up their service as senior advisors after decades of leadership in local government. From first internships in the 1960s and 70s to mentoring today's managers, they've seen it all and kept giving back. Now, this isn't a retirement party. It's a chance to hear the wisdom, stories, and humor that come from a lifetime of public service. So let's get started. Steve and John, welcome to the podcast. We're thrilled to have you here. Before we dive in, I just want to give a quick tour of your backgrounds, which I'm sure we will dive into a bit more as we get started this in our conversation. Steve, you started your career as a summer intern in small town Ohio. Back in 1966, you enrolled in the University of Iowa's master's program in municipal management in 1967. Then you served in the Army before taking roles with the city of Phoenix, Arizona, with ICMA, with Sioux City, Iowa, and Moline, Illinois. And then in 1984, you began nearly 3 decades of service to Champaign, Illinois, where you retired as city manager. Since 2013, you've been serving as a senior advisor here in Illinois, mentoring managers statewide, a true range rider as such, who's seen every type of community up close. John, you started in NIU's MPA program back in 1973 and interned in Rockford, where you ultimately became the city's first administrator before heading to Rock Island and spending 25 years as city manager, retiring in 2011. Shortly after, you began your second act as a senior advisor, helping countless managers navigate unique challenges with trademark grace and, when the moment called for it, maybe a little musical talent sprinkled in there. More on that later. On a personal note, when I was a student at Augustana, John was the first city manager I ever sat across the table from and had a conversation about this work. It's so great, John, that we're still talking. That I think may have been 26 years ago. But
Wow.
it's an amazing ride, and I'm so thrilled to welcome you both. Maybe the best place to start for this conversation is where you're finishing later this year. You're wrapping up your roles as senior advisors here in Illinois. You've been doing this really as a second act. Tell us a bit about what it means to be a senior advisor and why that matters, why the role matters.
Steve?
Well, it was just a great personal experience because, I just loved the profession and I loved my career. And so from a personal standpoint, the chance to extend that was really a blessing for me. But both John and I are in downstate Illinois, so uh, managers don't live next to each other. And so it's easy for them to be isolated. And so one of the things and- that I enjoyed throughout my career was just the chance to get to know other managers and, to steal their ideas, when they were good. I just relied upon other people a lot. And so part of what I wanted to do as a senior advisor is to help the downstate managers do networking. So we had a couple of lunch groups and, we did that on a monthly basis, pretty free flowing. Sometimes, would have a specific topic. What's the state doing to you, or what's your budget, or where are you settling? What are you settling your labor agreements for? The things that managers talk about all the time. And I think it was really helpful, and it was good for me because then I could understand kind of what the current managers were going through. to try to keep myself updated as well. But I think people appreciate it. I got a comment from one of the managers well, right after I announced that I was going to retire, who said that he really appreciated having a senior advisor because there are times that when he just felt alone, that there's nobody to talk to. And when things were going on, uh, he didn't know where to turn. And so, just being that person that a manager could call and talk to if there's an issue or a problem. John and I have probably seen a lot of them, similar problems with their elected officials, problem with their department heads, problems in the community. And a lot of what we do is just listen and ask questions and maybe talk a little bit about something that we did that maybe worked. So it's just been a wonderful experience. But now I'm getting old, so it's time to let somebody else do it.
Yeah, it was a good experience for me too, and I share a lot of the similar comments that Steve has made. I retired. I had a lot of energy. I was just turned 60, so my daughter was still in high school, and so I wasn't traveling very much. I really always enjoyed working with other administrators, and I was very active in ILCMA over the years, particularly the downstate folks, and would talk to them regularly. So when Steve Burley recruited me, he was a senior advisor at that time, range writer, before I took the position. And said, John, you'd be really good doing this. And I thought about it and thought, yeah, maybe I should do this and stay engaged in the profession. And that's the benefit for us as well as it is for our members. But again, a lot of our folks in the downstate area, you might not see them at the annual conferences, winter conference or summer conference, but they come to our little area gatherings, our lunch meetings. I actually have one tomorrow in Freeport, and my area is kind of that northern Illinois area outside the metropolitan area. And there's like 30 administrators in my group that I contact regularly to meet, and I'll get probably 15 tomorrow who will be able to make it. And so it's good, and you hear it all. I mean, you talk about some of the problems with councils. Sometimes we get calls about a technical question, and we don't have necessarily the answer, but I have a pretty good idea who does, who I've worked with, who might be working on that type of project, and I can offer that kind of assistance. But a lot of the things that come up, even though we may not be right on the cutting edge of AI or other developing technology, the human relations part of this job are not that much different than they were 40 years ago. Uh, the relationships with city councils, the relationships with the staff, the relationships with community members, all of those kinds of things. And a lot of those issues are the ones that we hear about.
Yeah.
And so you do your best. I always say, try to do no harm. And and I do think people really appreciate the program and appreciate ILCMA's devotion to it in Illinois. And we had great support from Don Peters and the board of ILCMA over the years. So it's been a good experience.
So, Steve and John, I am from north of you. I'm from Minnesota. So, help me understand the geography of Illinois. And so, where does downstate begin? Because we all have heard of Chicago. We've all been to Chicago. Help me understand the geography, please.
Well, downstate is anything outside of Chicago.
That's right. That's right.
Oh,
Rockford
that's
used
exactly
to be downstate,
right.
and it's further
Yeah.
north than Chicago.
well, that makes me happy. So, you talked about how there's not a lot of managers around you in downstate Illinois. When you were starting out, when you were sort of building these networks, how did you reach out to folks? What did you do? Did you drive? Did you pick up the phone? Like, how did you start to build this network of folks in downstate Illinois, outside of Chicago? And thank God it's outside of Chicago, because we're all grateful for that.
Well, ILCMA and the office does a great job of keeping tabs on any new administrator position that's established or someone who's hired into these positions, whether it be a county or whether it be a city, whether it be an administrator position or a manager position. And our job is to reach out to that newly appointed person and make that contact. And once they're in our system, we repeat the contacts for our meetings. And of course, they're always contacted for statewide conferences like the winter conference or the summer conference, but also it helps us kind of who we should contact for our area get-togethers.
Yeah, and in my case, my predecessor, Dave Anderson, was doing a monthly lunch every month in Normal, Illinois, and so I thought it was a good idea. I wanted to continue it. What I did was I added a group because it attracted mainly the managers in that area, and there are a lot of managers kind of in the area that I work in that was too far away. So I developed a second group. But yeah, you get to know, you build your list, thank goodness for email, because, I have everybody's contact information on my computer, and I send out messages to them. Sometimes I spread it to a whole group, but invite people to lunches, and I have cities host the lunches, so they have some interest in it, and people are happy to help out and happy to get together. So we do other things too, other than just the networking. I mean, and John has too. I know sometimes a manager leaves and the city council has no idea about how to hire another city manager. And so we're happy to meet with the council and maybe review the ordinance, particularly if it's an administrator position, to make sure that the ordinance is a good, solid ordinance, and then go through the process. Here's the normal way that people recruit and hire a city manager, and go through all those steps, and then step back a little bit if they want more advice. Why provide it? But usually they can manage it once they understand it. So we do that. I've done that several times, and then just recently we've had opportunities to talk to communities about form of government. So we did that down in Mattoon. I had done that before in Danville. We have interest right now in Sullivan, Illinois. So this Friday, Scott Wright and another senior advisor and I are going to go down and meet with the people that are organizing an effort in Sullivan to change that form of government, an election, hopefully next April. But they have the commission form now, which is just terrible. And
You should tell
looking
it
at
like
changing
it is.
Well, we appreciate your authentic voice, because we would tend to agree that the council manager form is the better form of government. It produces better results and better outcomes for communities. So I always appreciate it when people share an honest opinion, especially one that is grounded in experience and learning. So feel free to share all of that all the time.
Well, one of the things about it also that's encouraging is over the years, we've seen a lot of additional administrator positions be established in some of these smaller communities and counties also. I work with several counties who've hired their first county administrator in Illinois in the area that I'm in. And so three of the communities adopted council manager form of government since I started being a senior advisor. So, there's a lot of that. And I always really enjoyed that. You're working with elected officials again. And it's kind of nice working with elected officials, telling them the advantages of professional local government and all of that. Then you get in your car and you go home. It's, you don't have to show up on Monday after the council meeting. And so it's kind of nice. I really enjoy it. And they kind of respect your opinion as the professional who's coming into town. And it's turned out pretty well. We have not batting 1,000. There's some communities. Well, Steve and I visited Springfield, Illinois, once, and once in a while it kind of bubbles up again, whether they ought to change their form of government. We think they should, but a lot of the communities have recognized the advantage of having a professional. We emphasize the code of ethics very much in everything we do, and the association, ICMA, ILCMA, and a lot of them really see the benefit of that. And we get the contacts a lot of time um, about, would you come and talk to us about, Rockton, Illinois was a recent one in my territory. I met with them. They just hired their first administrator. Nice community, 7,000 population. It's going to be a nice position for somebody, and I'm sure it will be to that community's advantage.
So I think the senior advisor program is one of the best kept secrets to too many people in this profession. I think in Illinois we do a pretty good job of talking about the seven of you and the work that you do and why you're helpful. And I think a lot of the time, members across the country, ICMA, this is an ICMA initiative that really spans across the entire membership, but not every state has what we have here in Illinois, where there's this really dedicated group that's spread across this very large state, and doing the outreach that you do. I also remember being somewhat younger in the profession and thinking that I it wasn't okay for me to reach out to a senior
Hmm.
advisor for any support because I was just an assistant to the manager. Like you guys are going to talk to the managers because the managers need your support. And I remember I had my first conversation with Greg Belosky. Greg was an amazing senior advisor, led the program for all of ICMA for a number of years, and sadly passed away a few years ago. But I had my first conversation with him when I was 23, and I remember saying, I'm not sure that I should ask you this question because you probably, it's pretty easy. And he said, I always want to answer your questions as best as I can because what I'm doing is I'm trying to understand what you're dealing with today and how different it may be or the same it may be to what I was dealing with when I was at the beginning of. And so I guess as you guys think about the interactions that you've had with members here in Illinois, you know, what are you hearing that maybe you never had to deal with as a manager, that you're like, man, I'm glad that's their problem and not mine.
Well, I would say for me, one of the biggest changes is media and how do you communicate with residents? Back in the day, I had a really good relationship with the media, and I tried to use it to the city's advantage. And
Hmm.
emphasizing what happened at the city council. That's a positive thing, rather than someone showing up that is disgruntled about a pothole or something. And so they might cover that, but you try to lead them in a way to cover something more important and fundamental that makes the city look pretty good. But today, I don't know. I mean, there's different techniques, that folks have to try to use in order to get communication out to people. But I would say that's one thing that people are struggling with a little bit. How do you communicate with residents in a positive way rather than let the negative people kind of go on social media and just talk about the bad things from their perspective? That's one thing I hear.
Yeah, certainly, social media is different. It would have driven me crazy probably, but I know managers spend a lot more time reacting to social media than they probably should, and in terms of priority. But they have to do it because their elected officials are doing it, and their community members are doing it, and so they have to respond to it on a timely basis. And when John and I started, uh, when I started in Champaign, there was one reporter that covered the city of Champaign and the city of Urbana. That was her total responsibility. And so, we had stories about the city every day in the newspaper, sometimes multiple stories. Sometimes we didn't like them, editorials. But now, they have one person that covers school districts, cities, every all the local governments. And so, the reporters react maybe to press releases from the cities. That's about the best that they can do. So that's really different than when I started. To me, the biggest, the manager's role has changed a lot from when I started. When I started, a manager actually managed, and uh, you didn't spend that much time with your city council. They came to meetings, whether it's weekly or biweekly, or monthly, whatever it was, but otherwise you didn't hear much from them. But now managers spend the majority of their time. I think this is true across the board. I can't think about an exception to this. They spend a lot of time with their elected officials working on policy issues and dealing with concerns that they raise from the community. And the management function, to a large degree has been pushed down, to your departmental directors. They're the ones doing the budgeting and the personnel stuff to a very large degree. I don't know whether it's related or not, but the people that run for elected office have changed a lot. When I first started out, you had, a vice president of the bank, the registrar for the University of Illinois, attorneys, did I say bank? A lot of bank, a lot of bank vice presidents type of people. People who were, they did it as a community service, maybe to promote their business to some extent. But now those folks are not very active anymore. And then even in the private not-for-profit section, a lot of those people, they're busy trying to keep up with a job, I guess. And so you're getting very different kind of people running for city council, which I think uh, has is a challenge because a lot of them don't have any experience on boards or commissions, and so they don't even know how to be on a team, making decisions that impact the whole community.
So you both touched on it, but in different ways. And I think one of the interesting things to hear from your perspective would be how relationship management has evolved. John, you touched on it from the media perspective, and you and I know this media market fairly well and how it's evolved. And then Steve, you talked about councils. But I would say in a lot of ways, I think there's a stronger connection direct to citizen now than maybe there ever was before. Um, Maybe government's a little more decentralized than it has been over the years. But I would love to hear your perspective about how just the whole premise of relationship management from the manager's chair has changed over your time of service.
I don't know. I always think there's a culture of every community too, and the expectations of how you, as a manager, as the professional, how you relate to citizens, how active you should be, how visible you should be. Um, I think in that terms of the relationship, you kind of have to read the tea leaves with respect to the expectations of the community. And I always felt, and I really encourage the people I talk to be engaged in their community. I kind of look at this position of manager. You get the inside work, and then you get the outside work. And I really enjoyed the outside work probably as much as I did the inside work. Labor negotiations was not something I really enjoyed at all. Tried to delegate that, but trying to get a business project or economic development project going and getting people together to do something like that. Building those relationships, I think maybe it is kind of innate in your personality and how you do that. There's probably some differences today with respect to staff and their expectations in terms of relationships. We're part of the baby boomer generation and hierarchical arrangements of structures, and maybe that was changing quite a bit over my career. It wasn't even taught as the right way approach to take when I went to grad school, but it was still out there. And over the years, people you hire, that's not their expectation. You're not going to get the best performance in that way. They need flexibility, they need to be creative, you allow them to be innovative, allow them to make a mistake, and be supportive for them. So I think that has changed in terms of relationships. I don't know if that really addresses what you're talking about, Corey, but that's my thought.
Well, I agree with John. I think managers need to be visible in the community, not as much as the mayor, and maybe not exactly in the same circles, but a manager needs to be out in the community. I remember, you know, in Illinois, the state and the city of Chicago have their problems, and and that usually captures a lot of the news. And I've had people walk up to me and say, "Thank God I live in Champaign where we have professional managers and people are honest." Uh, and I think that speaks to having some visibility in the community where the community can have some faith that the people that are spending their tax dollars have a code of ethics, that they're honest, they try to do a good job for the community. The biggest example of that to me was a very difficult time when we had a police shooting. It was an accidental shooting. Young black kid was killed, and meeting with community groups, how do we navigate this situation where the emotions are so great and just a terrible situation to work through. And a group that I was meeting with on a regular basis said, we've been contacted by people in Chicago. We've been contacted by people in New York City who are more than happy to come here and help us work through this. But we've told them we don't need them because we have a relationship with the city manager and the staff. We don't want people from the outside coming in here because we don't need you. And to me, that was the best possible example of why those relationships are important. You never know when you really need them.
And to add to that, well, that's why you need to maintain those relationships on an ongoing basis so that when the crisis occurs, you can pick up the phone. It's not the first time they've talked to you.
Yeah, I was going to say part of the reason why we did this podcast is so we could build a network of people who have a resource. And so anybody in the profession is more than welcome to call us. And you guys have built that over the course of your career as a trusted voice of somebody that's like, if I need something, I can pick up the phone and call. I mean, I always, my senior advisor is my go-to is Geraldine Baroni. She is a terrific retired manager and a delightful human. And so having that network is there. I want to pivot if I can, because Steve, you worked in Champaign, Illinois, correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
That is a Big 10 school, probably now like a Big 19 school, because there's so many California teams that are now part of that conference. But can you talk a little bit about, because I've never worked in a sort of a university town, what is it like to be a manager with this big, huge entity right in your backyard and probably powerful entity? How do you balance being a manager of a community with a lot of external pressure nearby?
Well, fortunately, the politics of a university are very interesting too, because it's a big organization, and the arts and science professors don't like the engineering professors, and so just understanding the dynamics within the university can be difficult. I talked to a fellow who did organizational development one time, who was a had been a college professor, and I said, "Have you ever done this?" And the university says, "No, I never has, because it's not possible, because there's everybody's allegiance is to their profession and not to the university." And so that was, just kind of interesting. But, the city of Urbana and the city of Champaign took very different paths towards the university. And university, they think on the international level. And if they have to, they think about the community, So because they're competing internationally for students and for money, and the relationship with the state legislature and the governor is critical. And so, there's a desire on the part of state politicians to try to move programs from Champaign to Chicago, because that's where the votes are in the legislature. So, there's a lot of different levels to look at this, but the reality is, you know, the community is important to the university because their professors and all their staff have to live here. And so that's the pressure. They want a world-class community, like when they go to Portugal or all over the world for their conferences, they want to see the same thing locally, which, oftentimes isn't quite possible, but we try to do the best we can. The city of Urbana for years took the approach that the university is an enemy because the university is expanding and they're removing tax base from Urbana. And so they had a very contentious relationship for a long time. Early on, my approach was, and the council fortunately agreed, was, well, our future is really tied to the university. So we need to be the best partner we can and, try to make it as mutual as possible. So it's not just a one-sided approach. So we didn't see the university president very often. University of Illinois system now has over 100,000 employees or 100,000 students between Chicago, Springfield, Peoria, and Champaign. In Champaign, we have 60,000 students. I can only remember 2 times when the president of the university came to the city building. Half the time they're in Chicago or out right now, out fundraising. So our relationship was with the chancellor and the vice chancellors. We had very close working relationships with them, and so they were able to help us on some major projects, and we were able to help them on some major projects. Finding that place in the university that you can actually build a nice symbiotic relationship with is, can really be a struggle.
So while we're looking back a little bit, I think you guys both had really long careers with the communities that you retired from. John, you were in Rock Island for 25 years. It's a long time these days. And Steve, almost 30 years in Champaign. I have conversations with managers in the state who are thrilled when they hit 5 years and don't really want it to be too much longer than that, things start to get uncomfortable. I feel like, and maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like it used to be seen as kind of a badge of honor to stay in a community for a majority of your career once you landed there. And I don't feel like that's as true anymore. And I wonder what you think of that, and if you've seen that in the folks that you have mentored and talked with, who are kind of grappling with, is it time to go? Should I stay? That kind of thing.
One of the things I do in that instance is kind of share my perspective on things. And it is unusual. And I think over that 25 years, there were certainly times when I looked at other opportunities and considered it and talked to my family about them. But to me, as long as I was continuing to be challenged, and there are lots of projects and programs and things the community really needed that were exciting and difficult challenges. I had a good staff, a good team I worked with. If I had a good elected officials who understood what my job was and what their job was and provided support and weren't looking over my shoulder and second guessing everything the staff does, that they're really supportive. And you like your community. You like it as a place to live for your family. To me, then you start looking at other opportunities and say, well, oh boy, I've heard they have really problems there. They don't have a supportive council of the professional manager, and you start going through it. And so I would review that and conclude after talking to my family that maybe that move wasn't really a good idea. Now, everyone has to face that, I think, personally on their own. But they should. They should look at what do they want professionally and personally. And every community is different. Some of the dynamics of these communities, I mean, I talked to some who try to last a year. It's just brutal. And so it's all over the board in terms of how people have to wrestle with that difficult decision. But it worked out for me in Rock Island, whereas it probably wouldn't have worked out that way at all if I was someplace else. But that's what I looked at.
Yeah, it's personal and it's community based both. We probably all know managers that their idea of a successful career was bigger and bigger communities where, I'll serve here, for 3 or 4 years, but, I really want to go to the next size community and just stair step up, to a higher salary, bigger community. That was their idea of, a successful career. Uh, that was never really my goal per se, but I have to admit, when I started out, I thought, well, after 4 or 5 years, you've probably done about all you can do in this community, and maybe give somebody else another chance, and you can go to another community and learn and grow more. Uh, but one of the things that I found in Champaign was, and I got to thinking about it when I was I was in the fire department, some meeting with the rank and file. I don't know, we were introducing our values statement or something, and one of the fire guys said, well, all I know is that I'll be here when you're long gone. So, yeah, so we're not going to pay any attention to you. Well, I went to their retirement send-offs too, so there's some payback there. But I think the thing that got me thinking about it more was some really difficult issues that the city was facing and how to get them done. And particularly, and John that is aware of this too, because he lives in a multi-jurisdictional metropolitan area too. But we had a series of intergovernmental agreements we were trying to get. Champaign doesn't have water or sewer service. Water is private, sewer is a sanitary district. How do you control growth? And we were seeing more growth on the edge of the city, which was not good for the city in the long term, or for the citizens for that matter. So how do we do that? So we said, well, we knew we couldn't do anything with the water company because they're private. Let's get the sanitary district to require an annexation agreement before they hooked anybody up with a sewer. Okay, what do they want? Well, they had jurisdiction over a major creek running through the middle of both cities. They didn't want that. They used it to dispose of their waste at one point, but it needed a lot of work and they didn't want to pay for it. So would the cities agree to take that? Well, and oh, by the way, they don't want to get in between the cities arguing about, well, which city do they have to have an annexation agreement? So the cities have to have boundaries agreements. And by the way, when you start annexing, then these retail places out in the county, they're gonna lose the retail revenue from that. And so we ended up with a series of 6 or 8 intergovernmental agreements that took 5 years to negotiate. And if you're in a community for 3 or 4 years, you're not going to get it done. And so they're just, whether it's that issue or other issues, there are some issues in communities that are just so complicated that you can't get them done
Mhm.
in 3 or 4 years, probably. Financially, maybe it's the cost is so great. It's going to take a while to figure out how to pay for it. So having continuity of your elected officials and your staff seems to me to be maybe the only way that you can really address some of these really complicated, expensive issues.
So I really appreciate how you frame that issue, because I'm new to my organization, and the department heads have all been there for a lot longer than I've been there, and so they do have that context, and so I actually live through it every day. So it's helpful for you to frame it that way. So I'm gonna give you guys both some time to think about this. So presumably you've hired lots of people in your career and assistants, and so one of the questions that I often think about is do you want to hire an assistant who's wired similarly to you? You think the same way, and you can kind of go in some alignment with some speed, or do you want to hire somebody that is sort of your opposite, who can be a balance to that? And so I'm going to give you some time. So I'm going to hand it over to Corey to answer that question, because I know she's done it as well. Corey, when you think about hiring, do you look for your counterpart or do you look for your contrast, and why?
So I think that's a lesson you grow into. Earlier in your career, I think it's easier to hire, and maybe it's just your own blind spot. It's easier to hire the person who's like you. But and you and I've talked, Gallup's Strengths Finder became such an integral part of our organization. And then you very intentionally lean into people who think differently than you, because as organizations became more team focused, right? It wasn't authoritarian. It wasn't because I said so. It was very much collaborative. You had to have all of the perspectives in the room. And so I think department heads and above, the more diversity of perspective that you can have in the room, the better outcome product you get every time.
I'd agree with what Corey said. I think
He,
that's I think that's good
okay.
advice. But
Yeah. Say some more,
but
please.
but um I did make some hires that were really good and quite diverse and had good opinions. But I think you're right. The diversity of ideas, perspectives, backgrounds is a more rich opportunity to be creative in coming up with policy solutions. Um, but I made a few decisions along the way that I look back on and said, what was I thinking? So it happens over 25 years, and but I survived them. and and that's one of those, when the resignation comes at you, you grab it out of their hand quickly. so that
Yeah.
there's no doubt about it. I'm accepting that. Thank you very much.
Well, I look for people who are really smart. Uh, to help the city manager figure things out. 'Cause I wasn't always the smartest guy in the room, probably. So look for smart people. But to me, the most important thing was just they had to be a good person. I really wanted to make sure I hired people that were good people. They're going to be consistent in terms of the values. And other than that, a wide variety of people and backgrounds and everything is terrific.
So you just said something that I want to pull on a little bit, which is you always sought to hire someone who was a good person. And I think that's it's so critical in what we do every day to know that the people that are with us in this very difficult work align with personal values. And I know Steve and John, both of you, but Steve particularly, this is a copy of the ICMA Code of Ethics. So at the last ILCMA conference, Steve made, I don't know, a couple hundred of these and passed them out to people and said, it's small. You can carry it in a pocket whip it out every so often and read that code of ethics. And I took, by the way, I took a stack of them with me at the end of that conference to hand out to my staff team as well.
Mhm.
And I keep this on my desk. And actually, when I'm sitting on a phone call or a Teams meeting that's not going particularly well, I sit there and I read the code and I remind myself that these are the guiding principles. I think I'd love to just know from the two of you, because I know how meaningful the code of ethics is to you, but also is how did your personal values through your career align with the professional service that you provided to the communities that you served, and then after, right, as senior advisors, how did what made you tick kind of course through the work that you've done?
Well, I think it starts at a very young age, and I think you develop those personal values at the family level. I think I did. We learned at a very young age, uh, honesty, and telling the truth, some of those basics. And, if the code of ethics doesn't align with your personal values, you might be in the wrong profession,
Mhm.
because I don't know how you do that. And that's one of the things I think with what I see in my role now as senior advisor. We have a lot of folks who are getting into administrator positions who are coming from all over, from different backgrounds. It could be a former police chief, a public works director, could be a parks director, could be, who knows where. And so by bringing them in and engaging them to connect with the association, with senior advisors, you can share information with it. Code of ethics, what it is and why is it? Why is it important? And so you do your best to try to emphasize the importance of their personal values aligning with the code of ethics. But if people are into this business and they don't have those values, don't understand conflict of interest, you know, they're probably in the wrong place. And that does damage, I think, to the profession as well, because this is one of the most important things we have going for us in this business is the code of ethics and our commitment to it. You don't see a lot of it elsewhere in our culture, in our society, in our government, different levels. But so we need to hold it dear. And so I think for me, it really started when I was a child. And like Corey, I was born and raised on a farm. I know you were too. And I learned also, I thought I was the only city manager who milked cows by hand, but I did that when I was a kid. I learned the other thing about that, it was hard work. I think, I don't know all of your backgrounds and your perspectives. This is hard work. You you have to work very hard to try to be successful in this business, and you have to be comfortable with that. And I sure learned that at a young age. I'll tell you that on the farm. So anyway,
So, John, you touched on what was going to be my next question. So beautifully played. Um, you both had these very distinguished careers, and there used to be kind of a traditional path to the manager's office. How have you seen that change through your service to the profession?
well, Steve can add to it as well, but I shared that the traditional path. I don't know what is the traditional path.
Right. Yeah.
In downstate. First of all, there weren't nearly the number of administrators 30 years ago than there are today. So these positions didn't exist. And now they're being established, but the people are coming in from like public works director or sometimes city council members, so they're coming from all over. But it might have been a little more structured along the traditional approach in the metropolitan area, but in downstate, I would say some of our cities like Rock Island or Moline or Normal, Champaign, those would be more of that traditional where maybe it's an assistant city manager they got the master's in public administration and they move into it. But the smaller communities, not so much at all.
Yeah, I think that's true. Although the city manager that hired me when I went to Sioux City was an English major. So, there's always been some of that. Obviously, early in the profession, a lot of engineers were city managers and, gradually became more management focused. But now, we have in my area, there are two former mayors that are city administrators, and I think they're both really doing a good job. Uh, I wouldn't say that being a mayor is necessarily a good path to become a city administrator, but in their case, they both one of them was an administrator in the private sector, did administrative work and so on. So you see that, and we're seeing in downstate a lot of retired police chiefs go into administrator positions in these smaller communities. Uh, they they're more comfortable with people that are from a nearby community or from their own community than they're concerned about hiring a young person who's going to be there for 2 or 3 years and then they're going to go someplace else. They're looking for a little bit more stability. So it's kind of an issue, I think. But the challenge, I think, for the profession is, well, how do we help these people? That are stepping into this new profession. They're obviously skilled in so many ways. They have capability, but not necessarily with all the training that other people have. So how do we help them be successful uh, in this profession?
Steve, I think that's such an important point. And I was just having a conversation with Julia Novak, who's the executive director and CEO of ICMA, about that very thing, that our profession is changing from the standpoint of a lot of the people that are coming into this work, and how do we make sure that we are bringing the support structure and the awareness of the code of ethics and ICMA or ILCMA or any of the state association and affiliates, bringing kind of the resources of those organizations to these folks, because they are carrying on a legacy of the council manager forum or some form of the council manager forum. And don't we owe it to them to make sure that they're successful, right? And I think what I have so admired about the senior advisors that I have encountered has been your real desire to extend the outreached hand of support to say, look, we're here. Maybe you've never heard of ICMA or ILCMA, but I just want you to know that here's my phone number, here's my email address. Call me. Let's stay in touch. We want to help you through this. And I think again, that's one of the unsung hero type tasks that you all carry forward, which is to be ambassadors. We've had, and you've mentioned it, earlier in the conversation, we've had a lot of discussions among communities in the state of Illinois about maybe they're longtime council manager communities, and maybe they're thinking, maybe we should change. Maybe that strong mayor looks better. Maybe that's more accountable to the people. Maybe that's something we should really consider as a community. Or we've been a commission forum for 100 years and it doesn't really work real well for us. And maybe that council manager concept is interesting. And I see you guys rushing to that discussion, not to prove people wrong, not to tell them that council manager is the only way forward, but to say, can we be ambassadors for what this is? Let us tell you about it. Let's answer your questions. We'll sit in a public forum discussion and try to understand what your community's concerns are. And I think that that's such an important part of the work that you do. And again, something that we almost never talk about. And I've seen it in action. I had the benefit of watching you guys do it over the year that I was president of ILCMA, and it was inspiring. And I just want to thank you for being willing to kind of walk into difficult discussions, difficult community meetings where there's a lot of feelings, a lot of opinions, and you're just there to say, "Look, I'm here to talk. Can we?
Yeah.
What can I answer?" And you've done that just so effectively, and I just want to thank you for it.
Yeah, thank you. I had the opportunity to present in Dixon, Illinois, after a little bit of problem they had there. And I'll tell you, that was the easiest sell to change the form of government from commission to council manager of any of the communities I worked with. That I think it was approved like 80-20 to make that change. But we had a very open discussion about the different forms of government with citizen groups, and that was a good result.
All right. So I want to pivot really quickly. It's going to be a two-part question. So we love and respect Phil, but we also don't know a lot about the things that you guys would say is Phil's gaps. So if you have any embarrassing stories about Phil, we want to hear them, because we don't get them very often. So please open that door is wide open. We want to hear all the things about him, but also in terms of so John, you just said something about a success or an accomplishment. Sort of, what's one thing that you look back on over the course of your career and you're like, you know what, I'm actually really proud of that. That was really hard, or it was really impactful. Tell me sort of a success story of your own, but also don't forget, we want to hear stories about Phil. So it's a two-part question.
I'm looking at the code of ethics to find out if there's anything in here that would preclude that.
I was going to share that I'm a good friend of one of your former professors at Augustana College, and I talk to him once in a while, and he speaks very highly of Phil. So I tried.
See, Mike? See?
I tried. But
I
he's
tried
very proud
too.
of Phil. But projects for myself, I think, being there a long time, building a good staff, developing a reputation of good service, responsive, ethical. I would say that, and working with the city council to develop goals annually that provided kind of unified leadership and direction for the staff, so that we had a game plan and we were always working that game plan. I had projects. We did a casino, and that was a big deal, and it's still generating a lot of money for the city. That was one that took an awful lot of energy. Schwiebert Park was another big project. We had a very challenging one with Whitewater Junction, a new aquatic center, and where it was going to go, and it developed into racial issues and all kinds of crazy stuff. But when it gets right down to it, I think looking back, I feel better probably about kind of the long term, building that staff, working with the council to come up with a game plan that we were able to execute and build those relationships in the community, business community, as well as citizen groups, neighborhood groups, that kind of thing, I would say. What I would look to.
Yeah, I kind of agree with John. When I came to Champaign, the staff's complaint when I was interviewing was, well, every week there's a new priority. And so they couldn't get anything done because, what was a priority last week is no longer a priority because something else was up there. So in my initial employment agreement, I required the city council to do goal setting after every election. And so this, what you call it, goal setting or strategic planning, building that um, relationship with the elected officials where they're actually setting the direction for the community and the organization and getting the organization to accept the fact that, well, maybe the city council, they're not professionals, but maybe they know what the community needs. That's the way it's supposed to work. The elected officials are supposed to set the direction, but finding a way to where they can do that effectively can be a challenge. And I know John has done this historically, and ever since 1985, Champagne's done it. Dorothy did it, continued it after I left. Jones continued it after Dorothy retired. And so here's a whole history where the system is working the way that it's supposed to. Democracy works. The staff accepts the role that the city council has. The council understands it, and they're providing the direction. So, that shift, I think, was really important. I'm really proud that they've continued that. The other part is just, again, John was getting at, is building the organization, and whether you call it organizational development, or team building, or all of those things. Bringing in quality people, getting them to work out, through their silos where they're actually working together across departmental lines. These things are not natural for people to do. And so you have to find processes in your organization to make it work. Uh, we started quarterly staff meetings where we had all the supervisors, clerical, all the way up to departmental directors meet quarterly just to tell them what's going on. And, if there's something going on from an internal standpoint, talk about that and get people's input in terms of what's going on. But what happened was that was not the most important part of the meeting. After we did that for a couple of years, the most important part of the meeting was people coming a half an hour beforehand to have coffee and donuts and to talk to people in other departments about things that they're working on together. So, that kind of organization where people are taking responsibility and working together outside of their departments, I really was happy just to see. And I didn't need to be there. It's just they're doing it. That's what you want your organization to do.
So, John, I want to connect something you said back to something we talked about in a recent episode. And you very much talked about your time in Rock Island from what I would call inside the map lines. But I would offer that part of your biggest legacy here in the Quad Cities is your collaboration outside of the city's boundaries. When I started here, you were actively involved, even though the transition had already happened. And that was very much your legacy, is working kind of regionally on the front side of that being a thing. And in a bi-state region where the states are just a tad bit different, I think people underestimate just how important that kind of relationship was and how important you were to forming those relationships.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. I enjoyed the administrators and the managers in the Quad Cities and had great relationships over the years with all of them. In Moline, of course, we're right next to them, and it is the same state. So we shared a lot of services. We developed a whole program for how we could more effectively share services. We had the joint council meetings and went over them, how we're working together to do better work for our citizens, sharing expensive equipment, covering for each other if a piece of equipment breaks down, all this kind of stuff. And sometimes at the elected level, it doesn't click very well. There's a lot of jealousy, but at the staff level, hey, let's just do it. Let's help each other out. If Davenport or Bettendorf have a flood or a disaster, we're going to send garbage trucks to help with the cleanup. I mean, it's just, that's the way it works at that level. And so I was really happy to be part of that. And really treasured those relationships with some of those other leaders in the municipalities in our region.
I think I look back at my college years, and being in the Quad Cities was a really interesting experience because I had this front row seat, I felt like, to four very different communities that had to find their way to be connected, right? To be supportive of one another. At that time, Davenport was growing like crazy, and we, as students, were learning about what does that mean. What does sprawl look like, and is that a good thing, right? It was a real educational opportunity, and on the counter with Rock Island, which was completely landlocked. How does a community that's completely landlocked compete in an environment where you've got, you know, hundreds of acres ready for redevelopment with virtually no um, baggage that ties back to it? It was, for me, fascinating, and to see that at a time where the sky seemed like the limit for growth and opportunity, it was really something. But I think, John, the other thing that I look back on that I had the benefit of learning about was the way that Rock Island looked at its history, and historic preservation was something that was just a fascinating subject to me, and to study the way that Rock Island's historic districts would support themselves, and how the city supported that, and how those concentric rings of support were built out from there. It was a really great place to spend formative years when you really were wondering about, is city management the thing that I want to do? And it was great to have the ability as a student to watch that in action. And so I think that's something that maybe you guys don't recognize, is that there are people who watch and learn what you're doing from afar, with very little actual connection other than this temporary part-time residency that you take up in your communities. And you have the ability to kind of help them along and help their careers. And I think that's just, it carries forward into what you've done as senior advisors. John, one thing, I scratched the surface of this way back at the beginning, but so since John became a senior advisor, he's also leaned into his folk music talents. And we have had, at multiple ILCMA conference events, the benefit of John, who has written songs about the struggles that city managers go through, and perform them for us. And I'll tell you what, at the end of those songs, because everybody, it's like a country song, right? Where you're kind of getting into the lyrics, and you're like, oh yeah, that's me. Oh, and by the end of the song, everybody's on their feet because John's singing our tune, literally. So I think that's worth.
Well, um, I think this position, theater and music in school is not a lost benefit for those of us who get into this profession. It might be a little better than football even. I don't know, but you get team building certainly. But um, it's been part of my life, and since I was young, it was part of my family, the music thing. And so I found myself, as I was getting kind of further in my career, to just let it go, let's do it. And so for a volunteer dinner, I'd be the entertainment or the employee appreciation breakfast. I'd play some songs. If we met our United Way goal, you get the guitar out and start. So I started writing a few songs, and the Budget Busting Blues is one that I did and I wrote. And another one is that Corey might be able to relate to. The Smell Reminds Me of Home, which follows my transition from a small farm in Iowa to being a city manager. And there are some similarities. The smell reminds me of home. So I've enjoyed it, but I think the kind of the lesson I say is one thing: you need to have a life outside of this profession. It can really be very difficult if you don't step back and have something to fall back on who is really you. The other thing is, don't take yourself too seriously. Sometimes we have a tendency to do that in this business as well. It's okay to have fun, to laugh, do something a little bit outside the norm. And so I've enjoyed doing that. And I've written some more songs. Actually, I'm going to take my guitar for our Freeport one. I don't usually do that, but for this, it's probably going to be my last meeting with this group. So I'm going to take my guitar and play a few songs and that. And then I'm doing like the library has a fundraiser coming up. I'm going to be the live entertainment, so I, that's fine. I can sit there for an hour or two and just do songs. So it has been an important part of my life. That and exercise has helped me survive in a very difficult profession. Keeping fit and getting into the music has really been helpful for me to live through
Nice.
it.
So, John, I want to say real quick, I appreciate that you have said a couple of things that have actually other people on earlier episodes have said the exact same thing, that work-life balance, that work-life integration, the ability to have some fun, the ability to separate out is really important. And one of the things that I have always found helpful in the profession and impactful is that there is a legacy, right? That there are things that get handed down over the course of our careers, and hopefully, right, we're imparting things on people coming up in the profession. So it's a two-part question. Who sort of was a role model for you earlier in your career? What did they do that was really great? And then who was somebody younger than you that inspires you to stay engaged and to keep at it, even though maybe you don't want to?
Well, when I started in Rockford as the first city administrator, you didn't have a lot of role models, and this is my first administrator job in a city that never had an administrator before. So you're trying to define what is this position with staff, with the council, with the community. And I relied a lot on ILCMA and some of the people like a Steve Carter, Dave Anderson, Les Allen, uh, some of those, Bob Morris. I mean, I engaged with those folks to try to get a handle on, okay, am I doing am I doing this right? Is this going to survive? How do I get this position set up so that it'll be a sustainable and enduring concept in that community? So those were some of the folks that were very important early in my career to help me. They were professionals in communities with good experience for a lot of years, and so I could rely on them. In terms of a younger person, one thing I'll just say, I am inspired by some of the young people who are in these positions right now. I think we're in pretty good hands. I see some really hardworking young people who are really trying to do good work and are doing good work out there. So I'm inspired by several of the people that I will be meeting with tomorrow, who are working in these small communities. It's really challenging, but they're learning and they're doing good work.
Great. Steve, how about for you?
Yeah, I agree with John. I mean, there wasn't one person. There were people that I worked with, that I admired a great deal. Even in Phoenix, when I started there, Bob Coop was the city manager, and Bob just had he, he was the kind of person that could walk into any room or any situation and sit down and talk to people about, what they were doing. Just it was great with the relationships. Gary Picorni, who hired me in Sioux City. Gary was maybe the smartest guy I ever knew. But we had a lot of interests in common. The one person that's been, kind of with me or important to me for a long time is Lyle Summock. Lyle, I got to know Lyle, when we were thrown together working on an environmental project for ICMA. But then Lyle was finishing up his PhD, went to work at Northern Illinois for 1 year before they told him what part of town he had to live in as a young professor. Then moved to the University of Colorado, but then he switched to doing strategic planning and organizational development. And so I've used Lyle, off and on then the rest of my career, and he's still a close friend. So there we were, we were still in our 20s, and now here we are. He just turned 80. I'm not going to say how old I am, but he just turned 80. So we've known each other for, 50 years. And, his values and his thinking on management processes and stuff like that has just been terrific. Like John, I mean, I've admired John. I mean, John is one of those people. Patrick Ulrich, in Peoria would be another one who are, you know, I would really value their opinion about any topic just because I thought they were on top of their game. And Mark Peterson and Normal was another one. So many people, and the people that followed me in Champaign, Dorothy David. Dorothy kept telling Dorothy, you can do this, Dorothy. You have some rare skills, that you can be a very successful manager. Sharp, very smart lady, very successful. And then Joan Walls following her. I mean, I still have lunch with Joan, a few times a year, and just I admire what she's been able to do, in her career. Wonderful people, just it gives you confidence, it's just nice to have them as people that when they're a friend.
Well, I think that's a spot that may be worth us pausing and reflecting for a moment on what's been a really wide-ranging and wonderful conversation. Thank you both for the time that you've spent with us, but more importantly, for the decades upon decades of service to this profession, to the communities that you have served, um, to each of us, and to our colleagues and our friends who you have offered support to. Um, i- as I've said a few times in this conversation, the Senior Advisor Program is one of the most invaluable tools available to our profession. And you both exemplify the kind of person who, when they raise their hands, they really are all in, right? You're here to serve, and it's been a privilege to work with you both. I know you're not going anywhere, which is good. Although I totally get it if you don't answer the phone when it rings anymore, so that you can enjoy some downtime. But thank you again for spending some time with Corey and Mike and I. This is AuthenitiCity FM. We encourage everyone, please follow us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you're finding your podcasts. Leave us a review, send us a note, but more importantly, keep listening and continuing to be a part of this conversation. Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thank you.